Well, good evening again. The same announcement. I will repeat it. We will not start at the event yet, but this is an announcement for our online audience to tell them that we will wait for some attendants to arrive, and we will start in 5 to 8 minutes. Thank you. We would like to begin uh, with some practical aspects. I'm Manuel Putin. I'm a collaborator from the IEA in Public Affairs, and I will moderate this event. I would like to welcome you to the people that are present in Lima, Peru, and the ones that are present online through the web stream. And our hashtag for today, for the ones that use social medias, is hashtag ICCS 2016. And we would love if you could comment and post. Well, we have handed you a small bag with some documents. You have a USB drive that has the full report loaded next to some infographics related to the report that are as well printed on the folder given to you. All this will be uploaded on the webpage tomorrow, and the report is currently available for all of you, and for the ones that want to follow this through Sprinkle Open. It is available. This agency will publish it tomorrow in their webpage. Last announcement. All our studies are associated with a database. The database of this study will be published tomorrow in our website with www.iea.nl, and that will allow researchers to do a secondary analysis of the data related to our study. So related to this, you know that IEA organizes a conference of research every 2 years. We invite to the researchers and the ones that follow us online to consultate that database and use that information for the next conference that will be held in Copenhagen, Denmark in June from 22 to 28 in June. And we'll start with some comments and then we will hear the presentation of the results in concrete. And after that presentation, we'll invite the panelists to come to the stage, and after that, we will open for a Q&A for the journalists and attendants. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer questions from our online audience, but our channels of communication are open for that purpose. Just to thank the Ministry of Education of Peru, which is promoting this event, and GRADE, the ones that are hosting us today. Obviously, we would like to thank the participant countries of this study. Without them, it wouldn't be possible, nor this or any other study, and each one of these countries will launch their results at the national level. With no further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Humberto Perez Leon, which is the chief of the Learning Quality Measurement Office from the Ministry of Education of Peru. And I would like to say something brief about him. He has a specialty in education, a magister in cognition and development in the Catholic University. He has a master's of linguistics by the UNMCM, and is an expert in learning assessment. Has worked in projects and several projects. I'm going a little bit fast so we can hear him, and he's a consultant for private and public institutions in subjects related to education. His fields of study are based on social-emotional aspects. Humberto. Mr. Rolf Karsten, Director of the ICCS Project 2016 of IEM, Wolfgang Schutz, Regional Director of the Australian Council for Educational Research, Mr. Santiago Cueto, Research Director for the Development Analysis Group, and Liliana Miranda, Dr. Maria Teresa Melendez from INE, Mrs. Elisa Salinas from the Learning Quality Measurement Office from Chile, officers from the Ministry of Education, directors of education entities, researchers, students, attendants, and all the people that are here with us today through the internet. In behalf of the Ministry of Education, I would like to welcome you to this presentation event for the results of the Civics and Citizenship Study. It is not necessary to dig into time to feel and to live the effects of a deep crisis. Even deeper than economic crisis is the crisis of how we will organize ourselves to live together and to be free. In all parts of Latin America, corruption and violence, especially gender violence and discrimination and other dangers, manifest daily in day-to-day basis. This manifests in different situations. Sometimes it can be as simple as throwing a cigarette to the floor. The philosopher Martha Bonsman, the year 2015, asked, "What is in human life that is so difficult to sustain, and so difficult to sustain democracies and not to fall in hostilities and projects of hostile groups?" She resented the fact that education has put a focus on economical growth and profit instead of the creation of citizens from formal education. We have made several things, but not enough. Maybe not the right ones. Or maybe some of the most dangerous ones have been kept. And we need to enlighten this panorama. We need to understand what is citizenship, what are the values that we need to develop the citizenship. Now, the assessment has been one of the ways in which we have put it in the public agenda, a set of learnings that are central for society. And this double game between theory and evidence allows us to not just to understand how many students didn't get it, but what we need in the future, and that sets the priorities of the system. That is why this study is so important, because it sets light on things that are not taken into account by immediate politics. Additionally, the presentation that we have today makes us think about the results not just as a society and isolated countries, but in the recognition that Latin American countries are part of a common history, and we confront similar problems in which we can recognize ourselves. And this starts a deeper reflection. Peru, of course, has the honor of hosting this presentation of results. In this event, we have distinguished representatives of different entities related with the study, and with national and international experts that will give their comments for reflection. For them, our thanks for their participation. I believe that the presentation and the comments of this afternoon will generate from the different instances of our countries and our education community the reflection about educational policies that will generate more fair societies and better citizens. Thank you. Well, thank you, Humberto. And I would like to present Ralph Casterns. Ralph is the director of the project of ICCS from IEA. Ralph is the co-director of international studies from IEA and based on Hamburg, Germany. And he has been formed as a teacher, and then he expanded to research, design of questionnaires, and international studies. Currently, apart from directing our international studies, he's the director of the ICCS 2016 project, co-director of the TALIS study from the OECD, and he's member of the work group for the objectives sustainable development 4.7. Ralph has decided to do this in Spanish, so I hope he receives great applause. Good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the presentation of the results of the Latin American report of the ICCS 2016 project from the IEA. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you. in this beautiful city. I would like, in behalf of the IEA, to thank for your time and your interest in the study, and to give or to welcome our audience online in the region and beyond. Also, to transmit the greetings of our director. The comparative studies, big scale comparative studies, allow to understand better the policies and practices related with with education process. The IEA is performing this investigations or this research for more than 60 years, and the theme of our study goes beyond from reading, writing, math, and science. ICCS 2016 is the fourth study of the IEA that researched the way in which young people prepare to comply with the roles as citizens in the world. A world that has as a character is characterized by cultural diversity and requires a moral strength in terms of social justice, human rights, and active political activity. But we need to take into account the political contexts that are changing continuously. And according to The Economist, we're living a recession, slow and constant. And this was published and locates Norway as a higher democracy and authoritarian regimes like North Korea and the lowest. In The Economist report, 60 threats were pointed out, and the reduction of confidence on the institutions, the erosion of the civil rights and freedoms, and the activity of the political parties, and the confrontation between the political elites and the voters. In my perspective, students in the world are exposed to a very confused environment in the other side of the Atlantic in Europe, and with concerns in my own country, Germany. We have subjects related to populism, immigration, refugees, are subjects that dominate public debate and politics, and as well the life in communities and schools. Yesha Monk, a researcher of the Harvard University, suggests that democracy it is not the only actor, and there are other aspects. Young people are open to experimentation in terms of ways of government and moral values. And our successful work with countries of Latin America is in the core of our event today. More than 25,000 students from Chile, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Peru participated in this module, and I would like to highlight that the location of today's event is in part to celebrate the success of the first participation of Peru in the ICCS. The need to prepare young people for citizenship has received attention in several countries of the region. The society presents changes in their ways by low confidence on the government's changes in policies and commitments. High levels of violence, crime, and corruption are still important subjects in the region. It is not a coincidence that in the summit this weekend they will discuss similar subjects. The presentation that we have today will help us to understand a little bit better the state of education in Latin America that adds to the international report presented in November in Brussels. I believe that the information is valid and comparable that offered by ICCS, and that will allow the participant countries to assess the strengths of their public policies for education and to measure progress towards their objectives. The ones that design the implementation of public policies will be open to discuss with this results in hand and to know what type of citizenship um, they should promote and develop. Supported on the studies of 2008 and 2016, and the IEA will perform the next ICCS cycle, the only study focused on this matter in 2022, recognizing the volatility of the themes as citizenship and social networks and globalization will play a very important role in the new cycle as well. The relations with the ODS 4.7. The IEA expects that the ICCS study 2022 includes a Latin American model. ICCS 2016 was possible thanks to the participation and the enthusiasm of the research centers and their teams. Some of them are here today. And we will mention them. We will read them later. I want to highlight the work of the research team, the Australian Council of Education Research, and the work of Christian Cox from the Diego Portales University. We are thankful as well for the generous support from the ICCS in Colombia that were in charge of the translation to Spanish. I would like to thank all the panelists and speakers for their contribution to the Ministry of Education of Peru and to Grave for welcoming us in your home, and to the organizing team directed by Maria Teresa Estefania, our coordinator for research in Peru. I would like to thank especially to our colleagues in the UNESCO office in Santiago and Lima for their permanent support and help in the dissemination of the results in the region. Finally, our thanks and gratitude to the thousands of teachers, students, and principals of schools for their effort in providing the information that supports this study. With no further ado, and thanking you for your attention, I wait for the conversation about the result. Thank you. We will listen and starting to cover the results of the study. We will hear Wolfgang Schutz. Dr. Wolfgang Schutz is director, research director in the ICA. It's the Australian Council for Educational Research. And Wolfman works for the ACER since 2001, and since 2006 he's director of research, and he coordinates another study which is the ICLS, and he is an advisor for the OCDE, and the technical team of our studies in IEA. He has a wide trajectory in information analysis, in big scale analysis, processing, and modeling. He graduated in the University of Berlin. Wolfram is German, and he has doctorate studies in the University of Rostock. Wolfram. Good evening to all of you. It is a pleasure for me to be here, even more because it is the third time that we are finishing a study about education and civic and citizenship. And I started to do research in this area when I was at the university, at the Humboldt University, in the CIVIT project. And at that time, we had two countries in the region, Chile and Colombia. And today, for the second time, we have a wider group, and we can see much interest, or growing interest. And as it has been mentioned, we have several challenges related to maintain sustainability in a democratic society in this region. So, especially since Peru has joined our study, it's a great pleasure for us. And obviously, I will speak a little bit more about that. We have the hopes to have more countries included in our next cycle. So I would like to speak about the results, regional results, but as well as a perspective, international perspective of the region. 5 countries have a region. So ICCS 2016 is the second cycle of the ICCS that researches how young people prepare for citizenship to become citizens in the future. The role of education, of course, is very important. The guidance, the learning, to know how the citizenship works and how institutions work. So we have to highlight that is the only international study that is comparative and that covers this area of learning. Even though there are other studies that cover or touch some subject related, this is the only study focused on that. There are two main domains that we are assessing. One, the knowledge, the civic knowledge of the students, and this is something that we do through a test. But then we measure the attitudes and the civic commitment of the students. We do that through a questionnaire. As well, we recollect data about associated factors, about the socio-economic context, the school environment, and the community, which is performed through a questionnaire for the students, but as well for the teachers and the principals. It was mentioned already. Some of the contexts were mentioned already. First, there is an increase of globalization. Countries seem closer. We have internet. We have much or more exchange. We have more immigration, and that has an impact on what does it mean to be a citizen. What does it mean to be part of something? But obviously, civic education is still it still flows around the concept of a nation, but this is changing, especially In the European region, we know that now passports have they state European passport, but not just in Europe, but in other parts. There is more and more the sense of a wider community that goes beyond the nation. But those are concepts and things that are related to civic education. Ralph has mentioned already that we have observed a democratic recession. We have a period of time with the collapse of the communism in the east of Europe and with the return of many Latin American countries from dictatorships. There was the notion in the 80s that we were going towards a democratic world. And even though, well, but what we are seeing now is a return to authoritarian types of government or sorts of populism. In many cases, it has anti-democratic elements. More and more, we have difficulties to motivate young people to vote. And that opens to the question how we can motivate young people to vote. Not just to vote and to organize and to accomplish something. And that is an important context to take into account and also to relate that to changes in information. For example, nowadays we get information from the internet more and more. We have seen that in our data. Young people direct themselves towards social media, and now the question is, would it be a platform to involve young people? Those are questions that are part of the context. And something else that arose in the period that we performed this project is the increase in migration. We had increase of migration in Europe, as we know, and that causes effects on the countries. And this again, is connected with the rise in populism. There are several movements that say, well, it's enough, we will close the borders and we will be more firm. And if we speak about migration, we know that in the Latin American region, we have an increase of immigration. The key questions of the research were the following. First, looking at how these areas of learning are implemented in the different countries. Second, what is the scope and the variation of the civic knowledge in between the countries? Our study is similar to others, to the TEAMS, to the PEARLS, to the PISA. We want to know how much do the students know. But the third question opens another window that is very important in our context. We have a different balance in the sense that in what measure students participate in the civic society, in the different contexts that it has, means in the school and outside of it. And we focus on the perceptions of the students about civic matters in our society, about institutions, what are the important subjects and themes. And the last questions, in what measure we see associations between the context for learning and knowledge indicators, attitudes, and the participation. Now, the survey was performed in covering students of the 8th grade, and it was performed between October 2016 and June 2016, depending on the school calendar. We covered 5 countries: Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Dominican Republic, that have already participated in the last one, and as a new country, we have Peru. We did the survey in around 900 schools, and with the support of 25,000 students that did the test and filled the questionnaires. First, I would like to speak about the international results that were published at the beginning of November last year. And we have the international report that, and the authors are all members of our team from the ACR and from the pedagogical Institute of the University of Rome that was part of the study next to the IEA. Now, international results are focused on civic knowledge. We had a test, 45-minute test, with different booklets to cover a wider knowledge. And we included items to measure the changes between 2009, that means the first cycle of our study, and also we measured attitudes and civic commitment through a questionnaire that lasted 45 minutes, and again we included items to measure the changes from the first cycle of the study, and then we measured contextual variables to measure the surroundings of civic learning, or the environment of civic learning. First of all, people focus on knowledge, on civic knowledge, and that's why we have those rankings. And I wanted to highlight that it's not the most important thing in our study, but it gives context. We've seen that there was a group of countries, especially Nordic ones, including Taiwan, with countries with 35 or more points above the average. And we had a group, and unfortunately, the countries of the Latin American region have 35 under the average. We can see a wide variety, but it highlights that the knowledge, civic knowledge, is low in this part of the region. It's not surprising. In 2009, we had other countries with social indicators that were similar, as Indonesia, that was part of this group. They didn't participate this time, but what we see in our studies is, well, the selection of the countries. All right, we can conclude is that in religion there is the relation shows a low civic knowledge, and there was an increase in civic knowledge between 2009 and 2016. In the scale, we had two levels, A and B, which were the highest levels, and they were around 61% in all the countries, and comparable data, and that increased to 67. Now in the region, and this is related to what I showed previously, in the region we had 28%, but that increased to 33%. And here we can see the countries where we had changes. There was an increase of civic knowledge, and in two countries of the region, Colombia and Mexico. We cannot speak about Peru because Peru didn't participate on the ICCS 2009. And we looked at what does this variation explains? And we saw something that is well known, which is the socio-economic origin of the household is one of the determinants or the variables, and we could see a relation between knowledge and socioeconomical status. Now, the perception of open environment about or in the discussion of political issues and social issues has a relation with civic knowledge and gender. Uh, Women had higher civic knowledge than men. Now, related to civic participation and commitment, there were no many changes in terms of school participation since 2009, and young people valued the participation of the students, especially in the Latin American region. So there are many the students are that agree that it's worth it to do something at school. Also, we asked what they expected to do in the future, and the Latin American case wasn't different from the other countries. If we ask, for example, if they're going to vote in local and national elections, or they're going to get informed, and most of them answered that they will definitely do it. Now, we asked in the questionnaire about the attitudes that young people have in relation with some important issues. And there was a difference in the perception, which means good or bad characteristics of a democracy. For example, something that caught our attention, it was that asking children if they thought it was good or bad if the political leaders provided jobs in the government to members of their family. We saw that even though the average was 17, in here in the region we had 31%. The other observation that I wanted to show you, there was we had high levels of support to gender equity. So generally, there was a great support to gender equity. And in some countries there were increases, but not in the Latin American region, and there was a wide difference between the countries, and it was interesting how there was less support in Mexico and Dominican Republic related to gender equity. Now, these were the results that we published in November, and I wanted to give it as a sort of context. Now, we are publishing the Latin American report and the perspectives of the young people about the government and the peaceful coexistence and diversity in 5 Latin American countries. And the authors include Christian Cox, a colleague from Chile, from the University Diego Portales, John Angley, and Tim Friedman from ACR, and myself. We are authors of this report. It is based on a regional questionnaire that the same students answered after answering the test and the international questionnaire. And we gathered data related to the perception of students, related to government and their institutions, peaceful coexistence and social cohesion and diversity. The idea of the questionnaire was in this cycle and the past cycle to understand, to have information, to have more specific information about highly relevant issues for the region of Latin America. Now, similar instruments were created in 2009 for the Asia region, and in 2016 we had a questionnaire for Europe as well that measured aspects, relevant aspects for the European context. In our report, we saw the national context for civic education and citizenship, and we saw that the curriculums in these areas are influenced by the historical and social context. For example, in Chile, it is reflected. The curriculum reflects what is happening or what happened in the past. For example, the dictatorship experiences, recent experiences. For example, we had the government of Fujimori in Peru, and all that is reflected in the curricula. And every country will have a different history, and we see that the emphasis changes due to all these events. Just in Mexico and in Peru, we have specific fields for this learning. In Dominican Republic, we had this until 2015. In other countries, these areas of learning are transversal or sometimes at the same time or integrated into other subjects. So there are several ways of reaching this learning. Something that was interesting are the themes of voting and elections are not included in the curriculums of Chile and Dominican Republic, and just in Mexico they made reference to the voting or to the vote as a right and as an obligation for the citizen, taking into account that in some countries it's mandatory to do so. And most of the students agreed with a dictatorship. It guarantees order and security and economic benefits. And we have very high results, and we had a variation among the countries. In Chile, it was lower. In Peru, was we had a high percentage. A little bit contradictory because there's no much support to some authoritarian practices of the government. And in Chile, this percentage was higher in 2009, and now we had a reduction as well. We asked about the support to authoritarian practices in the government, and the support was limited, really. Something that can make us think, taking into account the result that I've just shown. Another result is a student with a lower knowledge level in terms of civics were the ones that supported the most these notions of authoritarian actions or examples. And it's an example. It's better that the state leaders take decisions without consulting, without consultation. We had 21% that agreed, 79 that did not agree, but there was a difference in these two groups related to their civic knowledge. So the ones that have higher civic knowledge are the ones that are the less receptive to authoritarian practices. And then the officers should impose their authority even though it implies a violation of the rights of some citizens. Of course, it showed this as a minority. Then the support to corruption and the trust of the students towards state entities. 25%, just 25, thought that an officer should accept a bribe if their salary is too low. 53% were did agree with the fact of an officer to get a job for a member of the family or a friend. So there were no, we had exceptions in this question on the answers. Again, we see that students with higher knowledge were less uh, ag- agree or did agree less with these examples containing corruption, and then we see again the examples for the questions related to political parties with the national government, and these are the averages, of course, of the five countries. Institution that has more trust was the schools, or were the schools. So the students, if we ask them, they express their trust for the schools. And what we've seen is that the ones that have a higher civic knowledge are the ones that trust the less. And that could give us the impression that if I'm informed more and I know what things do not work well, that is a possibility. It can be a reflection um, of the issues. Um, so the more I know, it is about this political institutions where this happens. So we ask about the perception of students about violence and peace. Most of the students did not approve the use of violence in personal conflicts, and if they had a higher civic knowledge, they tended to reject the use of violence. We asked as well if they agreed that the only way of getting peace was through dialogue and negotiation, and we had a high percentage, but also it was very high. The ones that answered that to achieve peace, the end justifies the means. We asked the students about if they were agreed or disagreed with justifications to not to comply with the law, and they said that some justifications, most students they agreed with certain justifications. Again, the ones that have a higher level of knowledge disagree with this justification. Some examples, if we try to get that they agreed that you can break the law if they're trying to achieve an important goal. If you don't trust the one that imposed the law, it was just 42. But if it's the only way of help their family, almost 73% agreed that it was okay to break the law, having that justification. We asked about the acceptance of diversity in the environment. We asked about different groups if they would like or not to have members of these groups as neighbors. For example, elders, people from other races, people from the LGBT community, different groups. And what we found was that among the girls there was more acceptance in general, and again that students from they had a higher civic knowledge were the ones that tended to accept diversity in the neighborhood. As in 2009 we asked about um, acceptance of homosexuality and perceptions of discrimination, and what are the most discriminated groups in the society. About the acceptance of homosexuality, a very interesting result says that when we, if they asked if they were agreed with marriage, uh, or same-sex marriage, that increased in the four countries where we had data: Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic. We had a reduction actually, and we asked from which are the most discriminated groups, and again, homosexuals, handicapped, young people, and elders. And where we could perceive higher levels of discrimination, so where it was in what is related to homosexuals, and less for handicaps and young people and elders. Now, some reflections about the effects of our results. What we could confirm, and it is concerning result, that we have a limited commitment with democracy and the state among the young people of the regions. Now, this survey in adults has very similar results. Surveys for adults actually show that we are in the lowest levels of commitment with democracy in the region. So it confirms what we know about adults. And we found that there is a lack of support to authoritarian practices, but at the same time acceptance of justifications to install a dictatorship. Again, something very concerning. And an acceptance of some corrupt practices, not all, and certain justifications to break the law for personal reasons, especially for personal reasons. Another important result is that in almost all these indicators, that students that have a higher civic knowledge are less or have lower tendencies to accept these justifications or corrupt practices, or the ones that know more about civics also are the ones that accept diversity the most, and they are more open. And that is a very important argument to state that the improvement of civic learning, especially in a region where we know that this sort of knowledge is low, that is important because we have space to do something and improve our current situation. We know as well that civic knowledge has increased in two countries of the region, but it's still very low, and we still have a high percentage of students with a low civic knowledge. Students with higher levels of knowledge are more critical, and they trust more institutions, but that could be a reflection of the situation that we are living, because in many countries there are several problems, and there is a high perception of a lack of or a low or bad perception, or a perception of bad management and the state and the entities. And improving civic knowledge, that can set the basis for a future in which we had a better debate on reforms with adults are informed better. And we have some findings related to individual countries. I have to say that in this first report, we are not explaining the individual changes in the countries. We give the information and we provide information and we are doing our observations. Something that is interesting in Chile is that students in Chile support less the non-democratical solutions in comparison to other countries, but in comparison with to the survey in 2009. In countries with high violence indexes are less or tend less to support violent solutions. Now, the idea is to use this data to make a more research understanding or take into account the different national contexts in these countries where we have this observation. So this is a first step. And that takes me to the perspective. Now, the reports are on their first versions for the international um, version, European and Latin American. Those are the first versions of the um, state of civilization and a reference point or point of reference for more research. So the data of ICCS 2016 and 2009 are public access, so a researcher can use those data to make their own analysis. Of course, we recommend to do it to do it well, and because we know that there are some challenges, methodological challenges, but we are providing a lot of information. We have a user guide um, that explains the database and that speaks. We have a technical report that provides information of how data was collected and how to perform an analysis. So that we need to deepen into this. This is not the final point. Or there are analysts that have resources, they have the possibility and to use the data to make more research. That is our expectation, and it has happened with the study in 2009 and with the CVIT 1999. Now this the next cycle is will be held in 2022, and we are preparing this new cycle. There is a window of opportunity for new countries. We had the first meeting, but this is a first discussion. Now we are, after publishing all the results of ICCS 2016. Now the work is to prepare the next study. We have more time and we are inviting all the countries that are interested. And it's an opportunity to continue to study this area and to cover some additional themes. And Ralph, in his speech, he has covered some of them, aspects related to sustainability, for example, to global citizenship, and to continue on some issues like motivation, information, social media, and internet. These are things that we will discuss with the countries and our participant countries, and we'll discuss with the experts and among us, and we are building the new cycle and always reflecting on what we have found and certain points that we need to dip in maybe. So this prep phase has started, and we are in contact with countries that are interested, and we are preparing this new cycle. And with that, I'm going to close my presentation. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Wolfgang. It was a pleasure to listen to you. And I believe that I speak in behalf of everyone when I say that the results are very interesting. Now before going to the panel, we'll listen to some reflections on these results by Santiago Cueto. Santiago Cueto is the director, research director of this house. Grade, Santiago. Well, it is an honor. Thank you very much to IAA for inviting us today. In terms of recognitions, I would like to recognize the work of Liliana. Liliana Miranda, as you know, she directed UMC for several years, and she had the vision to work with teams of authorities in the Ministry of Education to make this assessment. And then Humberto that took this forward, and you will see in your package a report to perform for Peru is a very interesting way of benefiting from the information. I was remembering the role of the IEA through these years that was very important, and I believe that it's in the booklets, but they have 60 years of experience making assessments, and they have performed several tests and studies in different areas. For example, teams in math and science that has several cycles, peers and reading, well, just to mention some. And Peru hasn't participated in this one, but based on these studies, we had reflections that might seem obvious, but I wanted to repeat them. The IEA started this reflection in which you say to explain the results in an assessment, I have to understand what has happened. And from the IEA, they start making this distinction between the official curricula, the document, the one that we should learn from, and what really happens in the classroom, the implemented curricula in the classroom, which is not typically exactly the same. So we have to see if, for example, fraction numbers are included in the curricula and has been worked in the classroom, and for how many time or how much time and with what materials. So that cycle between the intention, what is implemented, and what is learned finally. So that has taken us to several reflections, and I bring that because I want to mention this at the end. But in Peru, and I understand in other countries that are participants, sometimes we still in a theoretical discussion about the curricula, and we say, well, what is what we should put in the curricula, and someone says, no, this we should put this, or we should take this out, or this should be in another level, or should be put it into another context, which are, I mean, those are those discussions don't have an end, really, because there will always be someone that will have a different opinion on these matters, and that is where this distinction between the intentional curricula and what isn't really implemented, and what do the teachers do in the classroom, what do they know, and what the students really learn, that can be important. And I bring this take into account the reform in the curricula. We need to discuss not just discuss what should be in the curricula, but also to gather data of what is happening in the classrooms to be able to use that information and improve the quality of our instruments. Now, when I was reading the report, I was thinking, well, what a good timing to bring this discussion in Mexico. They are starting the political or presidential campaign, and in Chile, they have a new president, and they can make up some initiatives. And in Peru, well, what can I say about Peru? Well, there's a lot to discuss, really. We have changes widely known, and what I was thinking it was that in Latin America and in Peru in particular, in any at any time is a good time to speak about this because we are in constant change. But before the end of the month, we will have a political scandal. I know it, and some of these discussions would will be irrelevant. And what I expect is that there are concrete ways in which this can be translated or be taken to the classrooms or family dinners or media and TV shows, because this is not just statistics and graphs, but this is input for the strengthening of the citizenship, or as we have said before, very relevant subjects as social justice. I think it's very good that this is the only assessment that we have of this type of competences, because if we see the international panorama, it seems that education begins and starts with math and reading, but it's not like that. And the practice ends up being like that, because in some countries we end up providing incentives to principals and teachers based on the marks on their students in math and in reading. But when I go back to the idea of the curricula, when we say, well, they have to learn all these competences, but at the end of the day, the money comes through these two areas. So we have a fundamental contradiction here that we need to cover and expand through different instruments, and one of them can be the information that we have here. Because the 5 countries that are involved, more or less, we have confronted in the last decade serious problems related to institutionality and democracy, with coup d'etats or attempts of coup d'etat, violence. In some cases, it was political violence, and they still are in some cases. How I don't know how to call it, maybe street violence, which is of daily occurrence, and of course corruption. And this meeting, we have a summit that will cover this subjects, of course, and we should have invited some president here to comment, but well, the report covers some central aspects that I want to repeat. You have seen some of these numbers. This support of this dictatorship, it is surprising, really. It is unfortunate. If when you say that, well, it is justified by, and or there's no justification, but you see the results that say, well, if we have well-being for the people, it is okay or it's acceptable to have this type of status. You wouldn't think, well, we should know this very well in Peru, but we ignore this because we haven't covered this enough in the classrooms and all the public spaces. Now, corruption, these numbers, if a person obtains a position, it's okay that he provides or facilitates things to a friend or family, and if you had this position, you can benefit, or others can benefit from your position. Well, that is amazing, and the report covers all the subjects that gender equity and issues that are questioned in the region. We have here the president of the National Council of Education, and I am also part of that council, and we have manifested several times in favor of gender equity, something that is recognized by the United Nations and several other legal and valid instruments in the country, and that hopefully, well, will not go back in terms of equity, gender equity. and that is the principle that is discussed by some groups, and the results show inequity in other aspects of education achievements. I will summarize some of the graphics that Wolfram has shown, the results that we would thought desirable, related to strengthening of the democracy, respect for people, tolerance. Though the highest results are for happen for the students that show higher levels of knowledge on civics. So the people that have more skills, let's say, or the people that live in urban areas. We know that those areas, in our cases, are wealthier areas, and for women, and and it generates groups that could be prioritized at work. But I wanted to remind you of something. These are the results just for the ones are in the education system. If you see the coverage, for example, in Dominican Republic, two-thirds are in the we have one-third that are out of the system, and if we apply this rule, students with higher abilities that show higher attitudes towards democracies, we will have to see what is the case of the ones that are outside of the education system. So this is something that we should not forget in these assessments. We are speaking about the ones that are in school and in citizenship. That includes all the population, all young people in general. So that would be, well, something to take into account to interpret the results. And finally, I have a series of questions. I don't know if the panel wants to cover this, or maybe you would like to discuss further on, or maybe you want to share this later with your family. And in the first place, what is the role of this assessment in any national assessment system? That is a very important question. With Umberto and with Liliana from the council, we have tried several times to suggest the approval of a national assessment plan, to know what is the information that we want to gather about learning and different levels in different areas linked to the curricula and through national assessments, international in some other cases, but to have a plan, to have a certain time. As you might remember, in 2006 we had there was a plan at that time. We have assessments, but then we had a president that changed that into a census. That was a decision of the president at that time, and I think we need more plans, midterm plans, and more institutional plans that do not depend on the management. That's why I suggested again that it would be convenient to think about an independent UMC of the Ministry of Education. Taking or continuing this solid work that they do. But the second part of the information and the second part of the question, or the first one, is like, how do you plan to use that information, or how different actors will use that information, or stakeholders will use that information. And we can speak about the several stakeholders as principals, students, teachers, that can discuss what does it mean, what does this information mean, but also other stakeholders related to the media. And this is an area in which we still need to work on. It would be great to listen, for example, I will say a name, to someone who leads a pedagogical office from the Ministry of Education that says, well, from our perspective, the effect or the working plan of this in alliance with the UMC, it could be like this or like that. A formation school that says, well, we will consider this on the formation of the future generation of professionals or some or etc. So a next question. These assessments are individual and to assess a subject that is not just individual but social, and it's not just of attitudes but also related to abilities and interpersonal abilities. So thinking is something that we might speak with the team and Rob and Wolfram, thinking that we need to move towards the capture of the object that is the citizenship or the citizen attitude. I think we might need to complement this information with other information that is related with, for example, the abilities of the students for or to agree on a certain matter, to take this forward and in a democratic way, in a tolerant way, respectful and constructive. We would need to think how this is made, and we will need to have sub-studies, maybe qualitative, but I think that might help us to understand better not just individuals but also groups and the way in which these groups live together and communicate. So the question would be is what is the future of this type of assessments? Well, linked to that, there was something that made me think is when they ask, well, when it's justified to disobey the law? And some people say it's when I can protect my family, and this is a moral dilemma, like Goldberg mentioned. He developed a theory linked to the moral reasoning and their applications in education. And this is the dilemma where we ask, or we tell people, well, there's a person who's desperate because they have a family member who's dying, and there's this pharmaceutical company, evil pharmaceutical company that has discovered a cure, but they don't want to sell it cheap, even though it costs. It's cheap to make it. They don't want to sell it for cheap. What should this person do? They ask, and the question. It doesn't matter if they answer really that they should steal it. What it matters in that exercise that I'm mentioning is the reasoning of the individual of why he would do it, and he classifies this in a category that has 7 letters. I will not mention, but this question is interesting. But I was wondering again, using this logic, if it's maybe important to have in a subsample to assess the reasoning and the democratic reasoning of the students to see if the motives are selfish or not, or they're linked to the well-being of or related to social justice. So there are other questions, and I will summarize some of the results, but in a few words, when they ask if the people are racist, most people ask, or most people's answer, no, I'm not racist, because when the other says, when a group, with a discriminated group answers, they do see racism or discrimination. When they ask, well, you have seen people that are discriminated, who is homosexual? So That is the answer. So in literature, this is known, and I'm sure that you have discussed this much. There's the possibility of recognizing that you are a racist, or you have a preconception, or you are full of stereotypes. Um, but that is related to something I want to point out in life. You can see this type of discrimination against homosexuals, and this is linked again to gender equity that I believe is very important. So I wonder if there are complementary ways to measure this sort of attitudes that can complement the data that can be biased. And just two more, and I go back to the learning opportunities. What we have seen is a very interesting analysis, and you will read it. That in the countries, what is the context in which we have these assessments, and what do the countries have done in terms of the curricula to promote citizenship? And now we have the results and the attitudes, and what it would be interesting as a future agenda, this study of the learning opportunities and what happens in the classrooms to make this analysis to complete this triangle or this circle. And I wondered what are the learning opportunities to learn this type of this sort of things, and maybe we might think about several that we can look. I would think that schools, if they could make exercises, or we organize debates, for example, debates for decision making. Or I like when I go to schools and I watch the breaks, or the break time, to see the dynamics between the students and between the different members of that school community. Um, Many times the students, the teachers are not in the yard, and I can see different attitudes in the students. And lastly, I wanted to say that some of these things are not just learned in the classrooms, but also in the TV, on in the house at home, and it would be interesting to keep analyzing this and reflecting, because I will make a difference. I mean, there's a difference between this and math. You know, math, you learn it in the classroom. Reading, we find that there are variables, but there are other variables that are linked to the family dynamics, and like if mothers or fathers read the newspaper, for example. But I think there is a role of the family and the media that we will need to discuss further to continue in this field, which is consolidation of democracy in all our countries, but particularly in Peru. And with that, I wanted to close and thank again the IEA, the EMC, and to all of you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Santiago. And we are about to close. Now you'll know how is when Argentinian speaks fast. And now we'll invite our panelists to get to the stage. Elena Miranda, Maria Teresa Mendez, and Elisa Salinas, and Wolfram as well. You have the stage now. Just to know, Liliana is an assessor for Dedication Council. Renato Melendez from the Learning Quality Measure from Mexico. Alicia Salinas, International Studies of Assessment, Chile. So we have Chile, Mexico, and Peru, and Wolfram that comes from Germany. I'd like you to make a brief comment, and then we will open for a Q&A. one practical thing. You have to press the microphone to turn it on. Good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'd like to thank the Ministry of Education of Peru, the IEA, and the GRADE for the organization of this report. Well, I would like to be very brief, and I would like to highlight the importance of this study. I believe that the ICCS is very is relevant at the global level as well as the regional level, and of course at the national level from the perspective of Chile. At the international level, it allows us to have a reference framework in something that is complex and with so many particular aspects and cultural aspects as well as regional. So it's very valuable to have this framework that will help us to communicate among us and allow us to compare based on results, the strengths and weaknesses of the different systems, school systems in this area. At the regional level, I believe that the importance is special given the challenges that we have to consolidate democracy and the consolidation of institutions and the input that of the study for the formation of future citizens in this sense. In Chile, during the last years, the formation of the future citizens from the school system has been becoming more relevant because of the low participation of young people in elections and the lack of interest in politics that we have experienced as a society from the ministry, and in particular in the school system. This interest has be shown in three initiatives, and the first one is the incorporation of an indicator of citizen participation where we measure through a census covering the students annually, and that indicator is part of 8 not cognitive indicators are assessed next to our national assessment, which is the SIMSE. You might have heard of it. And in 2016, the ministry created a citizen formation plan. That plan was designed based on general guidelines given by the ministry, but it was designed at the level of each establishment in school, according to the needs of each school. That allowed us to see the importance of this for the system. And we have defined the repositioning of the citizen formation subject at this time. This is not a mandatory subject, and the results of the ICCS next to other characteristics of our system have made us think that it's important to put that or to reinstate that subject as mandatory. All these measures have been inspired and fed through the results of ICCS in previous cycles. Chile participated of the CIVET in 1999 and the ICCS 2009. Now, covering the main results at the Latin American level, I believe that there are two things that I just want to say. First of all, that the results that we have seen today confirm that this initial intuition, selecting the three subjects as relevant for the region, confirmed. We see that we have a challenge and the high levels of support to authoritarian practices or a justification for them, justification of disobedience we cannot be indifferent to this, and that shows us that we are failing to form the future citizens. As well, I think that it is good to see the positive relation between the knowledge, civic knowledge, and the different attitudes or civic and democratic attitudes. We saw that in several fields. The students that know the most are the ones that present better attitudes towards democracy. As Wolfgang mentioned, in terms of trust, and it's interesting that to see that inverse relations between knowledge and trust, and it didn't happen at schools, but it doesn't happen in the countries, because ICCS shows us that, for example, in Nordic countries, there is a positive relation between knowledge, civic knowledge, and a trust in the institutions of the state. That shows that in countries where we have high corruption perception, we have this inverse relation, and in countries where there is a low perception of corruption, we have a positive direct relation. So we see that the challenge is not just for schools, but also for the authorities and for the society in general, in terms of what model of society or what sort of democracy we're showing our students. In the case of Chile, we have good news, because we could see that in several of the democratic attitudes or the citizen attitudes, we have improved since 2009, but we still have great challenges in terms of civic knowledge. And even though we have implemented several changes, we couldn't see differences between the cycle 1999-2009 and 2009-2016. Well, to wrap up, I think that it's important to highlight this idea that responsibility on the formation of future citizens is shared evidently at school, but we must not separate the reality that students are living day to day, what happens in the family, and the role of the school. As Wolfram said, the results of that Latin American module are consistent with what we have seen in service performed with adults. So it's evident that we have a model that is replicating, and that the school has something to say, but definitely we cannot load all responsibility over them. I think the inputs of this study are fundamental. It's important that we promote other countries, and we invite other countries so they add to the next cycle. I think that that will increase the richness and the value of what we can do with the data, and motivate or promote this, so researchers can work on the data that we have. Thank you. Thank you very much. Maria Teresa, your turn. Well, good evening to all of you, and good evening to people that are listening through the internet. Thank you for the invitation to this presentation. It's very important that as Latin American countries, we have many things that bond us, and it's important how citizenship bonds us. And I think this is something that we can share. We can share the advances and problematics as well. Mexico, this is the second time that we participate in this study for civics and citizenship, and Mexico had history on the assessment of the civic formation, because as we said in the presentation of Wolfgang, Mexico has a specific curricula and a specific subject in school. But before getting into detail, I believe it's important to recognize the importance of performing a Latin American report on these specific aspects because it could remain just in the international level, but it's so important that we are able to have data for our context. And this is a report that is very clear and very friendly. Many times we imagine these reports with filled with numbers and statistics, or that they're not directed to us. But I invite you, researchers, teachers, to see it, to read it, and to see how easy it is to get into this data. So, why is important for Mexico to participate in this type of studies? Well, all societies had to think in what sort of citizens do they have, and what citizens do they aspire to have, and now we have to make that reflection. What takes us to participate in this type of studies? Well, the low participation in voting and well, the situations of violence that increase in our countries, also to have information, valid and trustworthy information, that is information performed through tools that measure what they have to measure, and that they measure in the right way, so we know that we can use those results for decision making. In Mexico, as I said, we have a subject of civics and ethics. And if we think about history, well, since 1910, there is a subject called constitutional civics. And before, in 1999, we had a subject of civics, but now after that we put it emphasis in ethics. So now it's ethical and civic formation. This year we will assess the subject for elementary school, and then next year for high school. That allows us to use the results of ICCS to complement and to contrast, and to have more references on what we are assessing, and where where is the scope for international studies. Well, on the specifics related to data of Mexico, well, it would be naive to think that we'll see. Well, Mexico is one of the 10 countries that increase in 15 points civic knowledge. That is positive, but we still know that there is much to do. What I could see in this first review is that Mexico has a few changes between 2009 and 2016 in comparison with other countries of Latin America. That makes us think that, well, we have an area that we need to review. There are several changes, but the changes in this civic knowledge haven't been significant, and it was related to the values and the perceptions. So, for example, in a specific way, we can see that the support, the use of violence reduces from 2009 to 2016. Again, in general terms, there are not many changes, but the changes that we can see are positive for democracy. Another important subject that we can see is that Mexico is the only country where we can see percentual change with an increase of the idea that the peace is just achieved through dialogue and negotiation. So we can think, well, in the context that we have today. And well, to wrap up, I would like to comment that currently the INE is using the results of ICCS 2009, and we are using them to start to identify the indicators for constant assessment. And what we are doing is we are doing seminars. So at the National Institute for Education Assessment, which is an autonomous entity of the state, they start using these results. That is important. In 2009, it was the Ministry of Education, the one in charge of applying that test, and now is the Institute for Assessment, which is the maximum authority for assessment and the one that applies the type of results. So they're used to give data to researchers for secondary analysis. So now the challenges are well, to use these results, but not just used at the level of decision makers or the level of institutions, but also teachers. We have very interesting, important data that says that discussion in class, it is a predictive measure for voting. So what the teachers can do? Well, it's generating that discussion and not being afraid of doing so, because we could see that the teachers, one of the questionnaires, teachers as answered that they were afraid of generating discussion in class, not to generate violence. But if we understand that discussion will actually make changes, positive changes, I think we must dare to use them. And then media, I think media are great allies, because they are the ones that can show what is positive, but also to put show the red flags with ethics, of course. Thank you. And finally, Elena Miranda. Good evening to all of you. It's a great honor to be here. I thank the invitation of the IA and the MC, and of course of the invitation of Grade. I think it was important to see the end of a project that we and I really congratulate you for that process. I wanted to take an idea that by Mr. Guadalupe, they observed that this concern related to the attention or reception of the results in the citizenship. As we all know, in Peru, they do pay more attention to the results of for reading or math, and that shows much. And this shows this is a symptomatic effect, and I think there's a responsibility, a shared responsibility among us. Certainly, I believe that we need to recognize the fact, and Santiago has mentioned this, that in the national assessment we have focused on reading and math, especially when we started the census assessments. And I understand that we are on an effort to rethink this and try to provide information in a more comprehensive way, that so it answers to everything that our curricula searches for. And just something I wanted to comment based on what Santiago mentioned, and this search for assessments that show all these other learnings. The MC has developed some quantitative studies. One related to dilemmas, and this will be posted on the internet. Scales of attitudes related to dilemmas, related to qualitative effects. I believe all this as a group can give us a much broader picture, and I wanted to highlight the fact that it is important to know, or it's good to know that we participated in this study, and we hope that we will participate in the next cycle. And I want to highlight the participation of AIA in this matter. We know that this is a very sensitive and complex issue, and even though we are trying to be very careful in saying at least as possible, because we are concerned with statistical errors, but also we have the temptation of inferring too much just to make the news. So I wanted to recognize the role of AIA because it works with rigor and a very respectful of the context of the different countries. They always leave the context to give leave the countries to give the context and explain the results. And this sort of exchange, I believe it allows us to have a mutual learning process. And then we'll cover in the results. I wanted to mention, well, we are impacted of the results for Latin America. We have the same challenges, but in the case of Peru, more than 70% the cases that Wolfram showed us. I wanted to add with one more that the UMC team handed me, is that 74% of the Peruvian students agrees with that laws can be broken when this represents the only way to help their family members. And that is something related to our challenges for the citizens. And we always emphasize the lack of attention to diversity, which is a characteristic of the country and of our education system. But I think before that we have to recognize ourselves as equals. That is something that we need to put on the agenda and the public agenda for discussion as a country. This idea that we should recognize ourselves as equals, and after that we can allow ourselves to find the particular characteristics that each person has. I think these are the two sides of the same coin. And then I had another comment. Well, Santiago Cotto uses in his researches, and I think he mentioned this figure of the perverse triangles between and that in our country are three factors that are reinforced, and we end up having a perverse cycle, like when children don't have opportunities and the relation with the family. In that sense, if we think about this, taking into account the results, we can see that in conditions, each study shows rich evidence, but also very consistent in the sense that the conditions in the country, socioeconomic conditions, can predict the results of the students. Between 40 and 60% of the variability of the study are shown by differences in the socioeconomical status. And even in the international results, our country appears with school segregation based on socioeconomical differences. And this is important because we are tending to have an education system that is more segmented when we find homogeneous classes. In the case of the poorest, and this becomes or this it takes motivation out, and but also we could state that the parents of our students that have been assessed present very similar opinions. Wolfram, I think, has included this in his presentation. I was checking the answers. Peru is in the 22 countries that participating in this study of the Americas that show their approval to presidential coup d'etat. So it is. This is what the children listen in the media in their houses. If we take into account this not favorable conditions, we have several ethnographic studies that show that our schools are still not those empathic environments. They are spaces that are not horizontal and where students, or it's difficult for students to anticipate the consequences of their actions and rights and responsibility. It's not a right environment to learn about this subjects, and we can cover all the subjects as discrimination. So all these practices show that all these opportunities and the conditions are not the most favorable. So the results that we can see are not surprising, even though they're concerning. So normal practices are not just in the school, but also in the classrooms. It is interesting what we have in the study that the knowledge have an influence in the attitudes or in the proxy that the study uses, which is behavior. But as the colleague from Mexico said, these practices, or if we do more practice in the classrooms and we promote critical reasoning and the students get used to reason and to argument or to discuss, that can develop citizenship. So, as we can see, well, certainly we cannot make the schools responsible for the results. I think this is more complex. It goes beyond the school. There are other relevant stakeholders. The family, the media, I think they play an important role, but that is not an excuse. Well, and not to know that schools don't have a responsibility. So in here, I think we have to work for Peru in what we can contribute from the school and from the education system to develop these capacities. We know that this challenge is not simple and it's not short term, but we need to do it, and we need to do it because after looking at these conditions and these results, the opportunities that our students have in this perverse triangle and the study, and this is consistent with other studies, the students still trust their schools as a learning space. Why we should study it, but yesterday I was in the presentation of a book called School and Diversity, and it shows studies that even though all these difficulties are structural or difficulties, people still trust schools. So I think this is an important asset that the school system need to consider, and we should not let down our students in this sense. and the role of the school and the country. So, well, thank you very much to all of you. I think that we need to do now is benefit from this information and use it. I think the OMC is planning to make more studies, but I think we have, I mean, from these spaces, our spaces, we need to try to create awareness and to use those databases and try to um, cover these issues and put this on the table. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we'll pass to the last part of the event. And we will start with a Q&A. We have two microphones for the Q&A. Please state your name and if you come from any media. Please be brief and clear in your questions. Juliana Vázquez from Argentina, La Nación. Elisa, I have a question for you. I am interested in the decision of because you register that there is a low participation for voting, and you are concerned with the formation of the young people, and you did the decision of a creation of a non-cognitive indicator, and then the citizen formation plan that has general guidelines and the subject of citizen formation. That plan, what are the general guidelines that you have for that plan? If they're easy to comment, because it's a comment. Could you comment on this? Well, the plan, the citizen formation plan, arose as a recommendation from a presidential commission based on different corruption scandals and in politics that appeared in Chile in the year 2015. So a commission gathered, called by the presidency, and after 6 months, they make several recommendations that cover different fields. And in education, they suggest these last two measures, which is the creation of the plan and the repositioning of, or to reinstate the formation. And they state the objective of the plan, that is to strengthen the attitudes of civic and citizen attitudes of the students. And the plan is not focused on cognitive aspects, but to the effective and behavioral aspects. I know that it's difficult to make that distinction because we see that they're related, but the ministry puts this as an objective and sets some themes as a suggestion so the establishments can work on them, and we can consider dynamics that happen in the classroom as in other spaces. They cover debate plans, programs related to the environment, recycling, or the covering themes related to accepting minorities. So the themes are diverse, and each establishment takes different decisions. Now, the schools should establish is planning, so that is registered. So after it, they can check for compliance. My question was related to this, based on something that Maria Teresa commented from 1918. You have a subject specifically for citizenship, and the result of the democracies in Mexico as in Latin America are not positive. So maybe there is an over a focus over this, but not in the participation or the civic participation in school or the participation in decision making. In Chile, I know this is different, but the report might seem to lead that knowledge is based on a subject that is reinforced, or at least this is what I could feel. I will comment and then maybe you can add. For Chile, what we have seen based on the ICCS and through in the agency, we have done some qualitative studies, and what we have seen is that at the level of participation, we are good. Around 90% of students reported or stated that they voted in school elections, but we still can't move even 1 point. Or at least not significantly in this studies. So I think the distinction is impossible. We cannot think that we will get an improvement just because we reinstate this subject. But we need to strengthen this idea, the plans that are more related to the effective and behavioral, and again to reinstate the subject. I think this is a personal appreciation, but we cannot see what we don't know. It seems cliche, but I think it's valid in this case, and the results in Latin America seem to confirm that idea. It is important that all these things happen at the same time, that the students get to know what are the bases of the democratic system, and what they highlighted about the voting and the curricula is something that Christian Cox has worked vastly, and we cannot ask the students to understand the importance of democracy if they haven't studied or have worked on subjects as voting, for example, at school. So I think it's positive that we have worked this simultaneously in the Chilean case. Of course, it is too early to show results. This happened after the application of ICCS, that in the case of Chile was in October 2015. Let's see if in 2022 we can say something different. Well, Marite, you had a comment? Yes, the fact that it is a subject does not ensure that the civic knowledge will be higher, and we see that, well, in the case of Chile and Mexico, Chile has that's a specific subject and has and has higher score, but Mexico is lower. So this is not ensuring that civic knowledge. We will have to see why, but a personal hypothesis is that knowledge is being given in terms of a prescriptive knowledge, and I think that is not being fixed because we need to fix it through experience. And well, what Elisa will commented on is let's understand about representative government, and we do assembly in school. Well, this is something we need to cover what is being said and what happens at school. So let's not stigmatize the school of the student, but they're co-responsible, and the idea is that we have to recognize the influence of the family as a first level, and the global environment, how this has an effect on the student. So it's important to have those subjects, but it's not the only thing that we should have. Of course, I say this proudly that it's important to have this in Mexico, but it's still many things to do in that same subject. So it is more practical, and also to take into account the co-responsibility of all the members of the society. Well, thank you, Maritere. Any other question over here? Good afternoon, Simón Granja from El Diario El Tiempo from Colombia. There is an important point that I think is very interesting, and that is related, well, the Colombian case and Mexican case, which is a perception of violence, and young people reject violence, but at the same time, those are countries with high levels of violence. I don't understand how this logic works, and I don't know, maybe in Mexico you have clear what is happening. Also, Liliana, you mentioned the relation between, or the importance that countries have or give and the media to the proofs related to reading and science or math in comparison to a assessment like this in company happens the same. And from my media to publish an article about this this results is more difficult than publishing something about PISA, for example. Please, if you can answer briefly. The report in Latin American ICCS doesn't show an explanation or a cause for this argument of the statements of the students. Now, that is where we have the work of institutes and researchers, well, to use those results and make the explanatory studies. Something that we can see, or something interesting, is that those are the countries where currently, maybe more Mexico than Colombia, that are living this tension, and their youth recognize the opposite. So this is my and yes, we would hope to resolve all those problems through dialogue and democracy. I believe, or I think, why do this results reading and math take more attention? I think it's related with the order or what is prioritized in other assessments that translates into rankings, and we need to assume the responsibility that in the educational systems we have produced, and we have focused our attention in that. That's very similar in the whole region. We have increased this sort of assessments and promoting them. In the case of Peru, in the last years, we started to promote assessments, and I think that creates more attention on this. I think this is a challenge, maybe to rethink on a second phase on assessments for a different level. And in Peru, we need to rethink this and how this changes with the new paradigms of the new education system. I think this is something that we have to think about. The assessment has power because it tells you what you it depends on what you value. Of course, it's complex because doing big scale is not as easy, and I don't know if it's feasible and it will be able to do so, but we need also to be able to compare and the monitoring system that the education system needs to have. So I think to solve that tension is not easy, but it's something that we are in a moment in which we need to rethink this. Particularly, I think and it's easier for me because I'm not currently in the system, or I'm not part of the system. I think we put too much emphasis, we give too much tension on the education system. Well, thank you very much. We will have one more question. I'm Walter Segara, and I am a consultant, education consultant. There are some things that I think they were very interesting. Uh, they already asked about the citizen formation plan for every school. I think this is very interesting. And in the case of Mexico, to incorporate ethics, I believe that is substantial, not just civics. But I wanted to stop on a number that caught my attention for Peru. 59% of the interviewees state that the need of in getting information about the candidates before voting. So the question is, how can we do so the students can have that information? This year we have an opportunity, a big opportunity, because we have elections in October this year for the mayors in Peru, municipal elections, and then we have presidential 2021. With this study, we will have, since we will have a study in 2022, this is an opportunity to go forward in this same line, and I congratulate the people that did this study. Liliana, you can answer. This is well, a very complex subject. I think that is related to this fact that all problems, all political, social problems, are related to what happens in our reality. Do not arrive, do not land on the schools. The learnings at school are still routine, or are based on memory, and that is related to the question of the Argentinian journalist. In the last years, we started to, or we are confusing knowledge with memory, or and I think it's important to see this relation between better knowledge and better results in the proxy of citizen development, and because it's important that the students understand. I think that is matter of understanding. It's not really about memorizing what are the institutions or the powers of the state. It's important, as they say, our colleagues of Chile and Mexico, that students can understand some principles of democracy. And I think that is the exercise what we have to do in the subject or the course. It's important to develop those competences. So related to, or to answer Walter, I think that I don't know if the students need to know the details, because that is responsibility that they will have when they when they vote. But I think it's important for them to learn that before voting, they need to get information about the candidates, and the Peruvians. Peruvians are currently concerned with the decisions that we have made regarding the Congress. So Yes, citizens' responsibility in terms of the representatives that we are electing at the local level. That happens as well to get to understand the plans and if what they offer it is relevant or not. We have a discussion in Peru if the congressman should offer things or not. Because that is not their function and that might create confusions. So students need to develop this learning. Well, thank you very much. We had one more question. Hi, good evening. I'm Ulman Murga from the UMC, from the team of the Citizenship and Social Sciences team that founded with the initiative of Maria Stefania that led the X assessment. Well, she is currently not here, but at the time of UMC, led by Liliana Miranda. And I had two questions. So the first one, more than a question, a comment that is related to this recognition of the students and their institutions and the trust that students have on their schools that could, in my perspective, become in a space to build citizenship. But I wonder if the system is contributing with or to reinforce that trust or maybe to destroy it. One of you said no one wants what they don't know. Um, and all the criticisms that the system has in our country, this is a profession that has low recognition, and if this systematic destruction from the press and from the government of the agency of the citizen is building an agency on the student. This is a question that we have, and if we have disapproved the exercise of teaching, maybe we could prove other strategies to rebuild that from a more positive point of view that recognizes the inputs. I think that maybe you can give us your point of view related. And second, is that in states like Peru, where democracy and citizenship are not consolidated, what do we assess? Do we assess citizenship or the exercise of it for a state in construction? And the answer is, from what you would expect a citizen to do with their resources, from collective participation, maybe to finance something that the state doesn't give, or we assess a citizen exercise that demands the state to comply with his rights. That is one of the questions in the subject of citizenship. It is a citizen that organizes and substitutes the role of the state to build a school, for example, or a citizen that demands the state for their rights. Well, I thank you for the question. From the point of view, our point of view, and related to the ICCS, the IEA is a consortium, and what we do is to investigate research, and we have studies in different fields in computing and citizenship, etc. And we provide information with scientific value, with evidence, so the governments of the world can take decisions in terms of public policies based on empiric evidence. Now, what every government decides as public policy based on the subject or math or reading, it's a responsibility of each government. What we promote is the use of this sort of studies for decision making related to public policies based on empirical evidence. I don't know if you want to make a comment, additional comment, or can we conclude the event? I think this goes beyond the theme. Maybe Wolfman? Well, just to say something. Yes, but you look very good at the table. Thank you. No, just to make a comment about the trust for schools. I think this is something interesting. How in this region, more than in other parts, we have this confidence on trust on schools. As an institution, well, and this catches our attention. So maybe I don't know, and as Manu has said, it is not our responsibility, or not our work to make recommendations. This is not what we do. We just inform, so the governments can make the best decisions and may do their own analysis of the situation. And just to add, we had a question about the specific subjects. There's no, again, to repeat that we don't do the recommendations, but we see international results and we don't see any guidelines that says that if I have a specific subject and that is related to higher or low levels of learning, well, and you know we have different subjects with different names, and let's take this with carefully. I think we don't have any more questions, and we have already on time. I want to thank everyone that is here and the ones that are following us online. And so thank you very much.